Well, good morning, everyone. You already introduced yourselves. Now it's my turn. My name is Colin Gravo, and I am the Associate Director of the Herbert A. Stiefel Center for Trade Policy Studies at the Cato Institute. And of course, I'm here this morning to talk about the Jones Act's impact on U.S. agriculture. So first things first, what is the Jones Act? I think Andrew already mentioned it in his promotional email for today's event, but for those unfamiliar, it is Section 27 of the Merchant Marine Act of 1920, named after Senator Wesley Jones of Washington State. And it restricts domestic waterborne transportation to vessels that meet four conditions. They have to be flagged and registered in the United States. They have to be built in the United States. They have to be at least 75% American crude, and they have to be at least 75% owned by Americans. So just a quick note, while the law was passed in 1920, it's a somewhat common misconception that maybe pre-1920 we had this, free market, laissez-faire environment, and that's not true at all. This is basically a tweak to existing restrictions, very similar restrictions that date back all the way to the country's founding. But there's a huge difference between today and back then. This is an excerpt from an academic paper, and it points out that back then, the American shipbuilders were some of the world's best, and our ships were some of the world's cheapest. In fact, we would sell ships to other countries. I want to say that back right before the Revolutionary War, something like 1/3 of all ships in the British fleet were built here in the United States. It makes a lot of sense. This is the day of wooden and sail ships. The U.S. had plentiful supplies of timber to make these ships. The 13 original colonies were all along the water. A lot of people very skilled in the maritime trades. But there's a huge difference between the late 1700s and early 1800s and where we are today. So let's get into that. This is a LinkedIn post by Sam Norton, who's the CEO of Overseas Shipholding Group, which maintains a fleet of Jones Act compliant ships. These are US built, US flagged ships. And this is from, I think, January. And he said that according to a study by MARAD, which is the US Maritime Administration, the operating costs of US flagged ships are about $7.5 million more than internationally flagged ships per year. And I will just tell you anecdotally, according to some well-placed rumors I've heard, the latest stats, that's actually a little bit dated, and now it's up to $9 to $10 million. So that's the operating costs of these ships. But then remember, the ships also have to be built here in the United States. And that's a problem. This is the MSC Arena. It is one of the biggest ships, container ships in the world. It has a cargo capacity of over 24,000 TEUs. A TEU is a 20-foot equivalent unit. International containers come either in 20 or 40-foot sizes. So, a 40-foot will be 2 TEUs. This is 24,000 TEUs. It costs about $150 million to build. Now, compare with this Jones Act ship. This is the Janet Marie. This is not a random ship. This is the latest Jones Act container ship built. It was delivered last year. It has a capacity of a little over 2,500 TEUs. So, a little over 10% the capacity of the previous ship. Its price tag, over $225 million. So that's $75 million more for a ship, again, with roughly 10% the capacity. In fairness, this is not an apples to apples comparison because of the different sizes. But if you were to look at a foreign built ship of an equivalent size, you're looking more around $50 million or so. So again, we're still looking at like $175 million extra per ship. So we have ships that are very expensive to operate and they're very expensive to build. And then on top of that, we turn to agriculture specifically. I gave you the price of container ships. Well, what about dry bulk ship, which is more appropriate for hauling agricultural products? Well, there aren't any. This is the Texas Enterprise. It used to be in the Jones Act fleet. It was scrapped a couple of years ago. And this is the Mississippi Enterprise. Both of these have been scrapped in the last few years. There are currently 0 dry bulk ocean-going ships in the Jones Act fleet. Now, if I were a Jones Act supporter, I'd probably point out and go, hey, no, that's not quite accurate. There are actually some dry bulk ships that operate on the Great Lakes. That's true. But again, I said ocean going, so operate along our coasts. Furthermore, our Great Lakes fleet, they largely transport minerals, things like sand, taconite. Grains account for less than, I think, 4% of what they haul. So again, kind of a rounding error. So we don't have many ships, so not a lot of competition, expensive to build, expensive to operate. The inevitable result of all this are ships, just very expensive shipping. But how expensive? We have a few clues. We don't know exactly, but there's some clues out there. This is an excerpt from a 2012 Federal Reserve Bank of New York report, which found that to send a 20-foot container of household products from the East Coast of the United States to Puerto Rico, where the Jones Act applies, it would cost about $3,000. But to send that same box to nearby Dominican Republic or Jamaica is roughly half that, more like $1,600. So double the cost. That's container shipping. If we look at tankers, this is an excerpt from a 2017 Financial Times article that quoted, again, our friend Sam Norton, the CEO of OSG, and he said that using a Jones Act ship is 3 to 4 times higher than using a foreign ship. And you'll note in the article, it says some shipping consultants say it's even higher than that. And this is important. He also says that these costs shape the flow of products, that without the Jones Act, we'd be probably sending more crude oil from Texas to the mid-Atlantic. A lot of that right now is imported. I think something like 80% of it is imported from Africa, the Middle East, because once you factor in the cost of transportation, it actually makes more sense to buy the foreign product than the American product. This dynamic is not unique to energy. It also holds for agriculture. So this is an excerpt from a 2013 report published by the Government Accountability Office about the Jones Act's impact on Puerto Rico. And as you can see, they talked to folks from the Puerto Rico Farm Bureau, and they said basically, the cost of certain commodities are the same, but once you factor in the cost of transportation, it makes more sense to buy the foreign product, things like fertilizer and feed. Then also mentions things like corn and potatoes being bought from foreign sources instead of American sources because of the Jones Act. This is from the USDA. This came out, I think, in 2018, and they said because of the high cost of shipping, that folks in Puerto Rico were buying rice from China instead of the Southeast United States. So the magnitude is such that, again, it makes more sense to buy all the way from China than the United States. But let's not make the mistake of thinking, okay, Puerto Rico is an island. Obviously, they depend on shipping. This is a Puerto Rico problem. No, this is very much an American problem. Here's another example. This is from the American Soybean Association, and it's an article about the Southeast United States importing soybeans, I believe, from Brazil instead of the United States, and it lists 3 key factors as to why this was taking place, and you'll see right there highlighted the second reason was the Jones Act. Again, the high cost of transportation distorts these patterns so that it makes more sense to buy from Brazil than from the United States. Also, this is an example for the timber industry. In the Northwest, the folks there said, look, we'd like to ship our timber to the Southeast United States, the East Coast, but we have to use Jones Act shipping. Meanwhile, our competitors right across the border in Canada, they can use international shipping, which is much more efficient. So it gives them a heads up, gives them an advantage. And they claim that it costs them something like $200 million and 6,000 jobs. This is just one industry, one region. Of course, industry associations are more likely to play this up, but this is from a government report issued a few years prior to that, and it flatly states that water transportation is virtually negligible. Between the East Coast and the West Coast. This is all about the lumber industry. And it says pretty flatly that the Jones Act is a big reason why why these guys can't export their products. So, one sec. Yeah, ultimately, I think the Jones Act is best understood as a law that interferes with Americans' ability to buy American products from their fellow Americans. I think the Wall Street Journal captured this very well in a 2019 editorial when it said, America first, kill the Jones Act. The particular example they're referencing here is the fact that Puerto Rico was importing natural gas from Russia. The United States is the world's leading exporter of liquefied natural gas. But we can't send it to Puerto Rico or New England or anywhere else in the United States by water because there are no tankers that comply with the Jones Act to transport it. So they have no choice but to import because there are no available ships. This is absolutely crazy. This is kind of a fun example that also applies to agriculture. Hawaii. Something I learned in the process of researching the Jones Act is the Big Island is home to, I believe, one of the top 25 biggest cattle herds in the country. But once they get to a certain size, they need to send them over to the West Coast to put them on feedlots and then eventually for processing. But the economics of Jones Act shipping are such that it often makes sense for them to put it on an airplane rather than a ship. And this article from the Washington Times talks about how sending a cow by airplane costs 27 to 29 cents, whereas shipping is 24 to 29 cents. But meanwhile, if they had access to international shipping, it would be 17 to 21 cents. And then on the right side, this is a resolution from the National Cattlemen Beef Association endorsing a resolution against the Jones Act and calling for its repeal. This is, internationally, what happens is cows are transported by water on dedicated vessels called livestock carriers. Here's a photo of one. But, this is a recurring theme with the Jones Act. There are no livestock carriers in the Jones Act fleet. We don't have livestock carriers. We don't have any dry bulk carriers that are ocean going. We don't have, liquefied natural gas carriers. We don't have a fleet that meets our country's economic needs. Instead, often, the majority still go by ship in what are called modified containers called cowtainers. These are not used anywhere else in the world. It's just a uniquely American thing. And then some of them also go by air. And there's a photo of cattle being loaded onto Pacific Airlift to go to the West Coast. So obviously the Jones Act distorts and makes shipping more expensive. And then also distorts trading patterns. So that gives an edge to foreign imports. And, by the way, I got to put out this disclaimer. I'm a free trader. I don't have a problem with imports, but I think it's crazy that we're putting Americans, businesses at a disadvantage on the back foot and giving an edge to imports. I think there should be a level playing field to the extent possible. But another overlooked cost of the Jones Act is that the Jones Act is a trade barrier. And when the United States goes to negotiate free trade agreements, one thing we always do is to say, Jones Act, not touching that. That's not up for negotiation. And our trading partners respond by doing the same. They say, okay, you're not going to give us that. Well, there's something you want, we're going to take away. And this is a recent example, a relatively recent, the U.S.-South Korea Free Trade Agreement, which is one of the most recent FTAs signed. The United States during the negotiation said, hey, we'd like to get more access to your country's rice market. I have to think that in Korea, rice is probably a non-trivial part of the diet and probably a pretty decent-sized market. And the Koreans said, oh, really? Well, then we want access to your shipbuilding market. We build lots of ships. We'd like to sell you some. The U.S. said, no way. So we didn't get access to their rice market. Now, I will note that in 2019, the Trump administration reached an agreement with South Korea that did get expanded access to rice. And this was said to be worth $110 million annually. So this is money that American farmers could have been making all the while. It's also possible that without the Jones Act, we would have gotten even more access to South Korea's market. And then the most important thing to emphasize here is that this is U.S. and South Korea, but this dynamic plays itself out for many countries. If the U.S., for example, under Obama, there was talk about negotiating a free trade agreement with the European Union, and American farmers would love expanded access to that. Well, the EU Shipping Association, they said, yeah, we're going to do that. We want access to the U.S. shipping market. So again, this is another way in which this harms the U.S. agriculture industry. One more thing to note. Andrew, you mentioned in your remarks, I think you talked about dredging. So yes, the Jones Act, as well as something called the Foreign Dredge Act, which is a very similar law, mirrors the Jones Act, except it's for dredging instead of transportation. It drives up the cost of dredging in this country, which means that our waterways are less efficient. And that has implications for everything that moves in our waterways, of course, including bulk items like agricultural products. And this is from, I think, the Minnesota Soybean Association. And they referenced a study that said that without, that if we could get dredge our the Mississippi River to 50 feet, that it would make it much more efficient with, attendant cost savings. So, again, another way in which these maritime restrictions harm the agriculture industry. So this just speaks to the difference in costs between U.S. and international dredging. This is an article from a New Orleans newspaper that noted that in Louisiana there was a project to move 3.5 superdomes worth of sand. It cost $118 million. Meanwhile, the Netherlands, they did a project that had about twice the volume of sand moved, and it was more than half the price. So I have to think that money matters and that this affects the U.S.'s ability to efficiently dredge all its waterways. So as Andrew mentioned earlier, the agriculture industry has been attuned to this. They used to really be in the fight on the Jones Act. This is testimony, an excerpt from, I think, Dean Kleckner, who was the head of the U.S. Farm Bureau back in the 90s, and he testified before Congress. And in this highlighted section, he says the Jones Act has resulted in a decline of our competitiveness. He said, my corn goes down the Mississippi River by barge, but I can't ship it to another state like North Carolina because the ships just aren't there. They don't exist. Again, we have 0 dry bulk ships in the Jones Act fleet. This also explains why back in the 90s, there was something called the Jones Act Reform Coalition, and this is a list of its membership. I don't know if you guys can quite read that, but take my word for it. If you can't, there are plenty of agricultural firms and associations represented there. And I also note that back in 2015, Senator McCain was leading an effort at the time to try to get the Jones Act. He was trying to repeal it or reform it. And this is an open letter from the U.S. Farm Bureau at the time to the U.S. Senate saying, we support this, we endorse this. You'll notice this is not an official letterhead. This is because this letter was entered into the congressional record by John McCain. So I just cut and pasted it from there. That explains that, in case you're curious. So anyway, that's kind of my spiel just about the Jones Act and agriculture. I'm happy to pull up here. I've thrown a lot of stuff at you and answer questions. If you like, we can also go on and talk about, the politics of it. We can talk about the national security justification for it. But I just wanted to pause here and see if people had questions.
Oh, they certainly do. And do you have a contact slide in there for yourself?
I don't, but I can put that in the chat. More than happy. And obviously, you have my contact information, so if people want to reach out.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Yeah, well, there are several comments and questions in the chat there as well. Pablo, I'll let you lead off since you've got 2 of those.
Yeah, so I was really interested in if anybody's done a study on what is actually the cause of the increased cost. Is it the cost of using U.S. steel? Is it the cost of using U.S. shipbuilders? Is it the cost of using U.S. crews? Where does that cost come from?
So on the shipbuilding side, it's largely, why. So typically U.S. ships, depending on the vessel type, the rule of thumb, the Congressional Research Service put out a report last year that said a U.S. built ship can be 4 or more times expensive as one built abroad. So, you take a $50 million ship abroad, that's more like a $200 million ship here in the United States. So why is that? We can build airplanes, cars. What is it with ships? Ships, it's a few different things going on. Shipbuilding is largely a story about economies of scale. So if you look at the Asian shipyards that are the world that produce like 90+% of the world's ships, they'll crank out dozens of ships per year. Last year, U.S. shipyards combined, all U.S. shipyards combined, produced one ocean-going commercial ship, that Janet Marie that I showed you earlier. That was the one ship that was built last year. This year, there are 0 ships being built. In fairness, there are a few, I think there's a wind turbine installation vessel being built. There are a couple dredging vessels. And then, of course, there are, numerous tugboats and barges and the like. But in terms of large ships, I mean, 1, 2 per year is about par for the course with U.S. shipbuilding. So that means that, if you're a shipyard, you want to go buy steel. Well, if you place an order from a steel plant and you say, yeah, I need enough steel to build 50 ships, and versus the guy says, I'm building 2, you're going to get a different price. You're the guy says, hey, I need to order 20 engines. You're the guy says, I need 2 engines. Well, the engine manufacturer is going to give you a different price. Then also, it's a very capital intensive industry. You need lots of technology, huge cranes, for example, the way ships are built these days are in blocks. They lift these blocks into place. Well, if you're buying a new crane and you're spreading that cost over 40 ships a year, okay. If you're spreading that cost over 2 ships a year maximum, again, that has knock-on effects. And then lastly, a couple more things. There's less specialization in U.S. shipyards. U.S. shipyards are more a jack of trade, master of none, because they build basically exclusively for a captive domestic market, which is relatively small compared to the rest of the world. Whereas foreign shipyards, they tend to specialize more in certain kinds of vessels and get really good at those. For example, Finland, they've built something like 60% of all the icebreakers in the world. The South Koreans are the top builders of liquefied natural gas tankers. The Dutch traditionally very good at building dredgers. The Western Europeans build cruise ships, like 90+% of the world's cruise ships, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas, the U.S., to the extent we have a specialty, it's maybe like river barges or something. And then lastly, just competition. I think competition makes you better, and we have less competition. So I think it just logically follows that, industries not subject to a lot of competition will become uncompetitive almost just by definition. And then on the operating side, the main cost driver is the cost of the crew. U.S. crew costs are they're a little over 5 times that of international crew. Other things like there's insurance costs are higher on U.S. vessels. We're a more litigious society. U.S. Sailors are more likely to sue and win big money than foreign mariners. Also, there are other things like the U.S. Imposes a 50% tariff on any shipyard repairs made overseas. So you take your ship to Japan, for example, to get repaired. It's going to get hit with that 50% tariff. Whereas internationally, I'm not aware of any other country that imposes something like that. So that drives up the cost. But definitely by far, I want to say like 80+% of the delta there is going to be explained by U.S. crew costs.
Yeah, and the reason I pointed it out, now I played dirty. Not only did I spend a career in the military, but my father was a career naval architect. And so if you've been following what's been going on in U.S. steel and U.S. shipbuilding for the last 40 years, it's been a slow decline with China stealing intellectual property for steel production. So they have decimated Bethlehem Steel, which was a huge company at one point. U.S. Steel, which was a huge company at one point, have been put out of business. So now all that steel is being developed in China, which raises the cost of building the ships in the United States. 10 years ago now, there was a Chinese intrusion into the American Bureau of Shipping, which is the largest classing and licensing operation for ocean-going vessels in the United States, second in the world next to Lloyd's of London. And so while I understand why the Jones Act is a bad thing for agriculture, I think if you look at it, and it definitely needs to be updated, if you look at it in the aggregate for national security of the United States, they've already decimated the steel production, they've already decimated the shipbuilding, they're decimating the classing and licensing. Pretty soon what's going to happen is they're just going to raise the cost and tariffs to get foreign stuff in the United States, and then we're going to be stuck because we have no other option. So, from my point, getting rid of the Jones Act wholesale is a short-term win and a strategic loss for the nation. It's just something to keep in mind when you look at it from outside of agriculture.
Yeah, so I take your points very well. My response to that is I would submit that the Jones Act is a national security liability. I think that separating the U.S., severing our ability to use allied shipyards, Korea, Japan, which are treaty allies of ours, and forcing Americans to pay 5 times the price for new ships is a big win for China. One ironic thing about with China is that we raise the cost of ships dramatically, which means we don't build many new ships because they're so insanely expensive, which in turn means that we use our ships. Typically internationally, a ship is used for 20, 25 years, 15 years on the early side, 30 years on the late side, before it's replaced and updated with a new one. Jones Act ships are used. I did a calculation. The last 17 ships scrapped at an average age of like 43. So we have old ships, which reduces their military utility. And then, of course, old ships need more maintenance and repair. And guess where they take these ships to get repaired? China. There's the huge numbers of, in fact, we actually took a Jones Act ship recently that was built in, I think, 1980. And we just, and the company, the Jones Act company, upgraded it to LNG power in a Chinese shipyard. It's already, 40 plus years old. They intend to keep using it. So we're actually, by creating this old fleet, we're putting money in the hands of Chinese state-owned shipbuilding. They do it at Costco shipyard in Nantong, China. And then we tell ourselves this is for national security. I think there's a legitimate case to be made. You don't want to be dependent on China. I also point out that the last Jones Act ship built, the Janet Marie, it uses components that come from the Chinese, again, the Chinese State Shipbuilding Corporation. So I think that the law is absolutely screaming for some kind of reform. I think that there's a good case to be made that maybe repeal is too far, but I do think at the very least allowing Americans to buy ships from allied shipyards makes a whole lot of sense. Because it's difficult to make the case that this law is working. We have basically almost no shipbuilding. To the extent we have shipyards in this country, roughly 75% or so of the revenue is coming from government contracts to build for the Navy. Newport News, they build nothing Jones Act. Bath Iron Works up in Maine, nothing Jones Act. Huntington Ingalls down Pascagoula, nothing Jones Act. It's all military contracts that are keeping that going. And that's separate from the Jones Act. You got rid of the Jones Act, that has no impact on that. So I think we need to strike a balance at the very least. And I think that right now we're not getting that balance correct. And then the last thing I'll point out is that I fully recognize our national security requirements. We have to meet them. I'm all for, say, targeted subsidies that say, go to the DOD and say, how many ships do you guys need in times of war to transport supplies for a military? And then fund it and say, okay, we'll subsidize the operation of X number of ships. We ensure that we have those U.S. flag ships available. I just think the Jones Act it's bad economics, and I don't think it's a very effective or cost-effective way, either one, of meeting our national security ties. But I appreciate your point. Those are good points worth addressing, worth raising.
Hey, Colin, before I turn it over to Ewing, quick question for you. I see a lot of startups and CEOs pitch, and they always start with the problem, the team, and the solution. But one of the slides is who are the competitors. So who benefits from the Jones Act? I mean, there's got to be strong benefit. I know the unions, it's knee jerk. It's kind of ingrained in the DNA of who they are when they take those positions. But I mean, who really is benefiting from this?
So if you just look at who lobbies for it, who's out there making the case, there is an organization, the leading pro-Jones Act organization out there is called the American Maritime Partnership. And their membership is comprised of, they have representatives, the unions, the shipyards, and the vessel operators. Those are your big three. Obviously, the shipyards, they like the law. The law says you have to build what they make. You have to buy what they make. Then you have the mariner unions. They don't want to compete with foreign mariners, understandably. And then you have the guys that operate the ships. They absolutely don't want to compete with foreign shipping because they get their lunches eaten right now. So that's who's out there making the case. Beyond the American Maritime Partnership and the individual unions, you have, say, the Lake Carriers Association that operates in the Great Lakes. You have the American waterway operators. They represent folks that operate on the inland waterways and rivers. These are tug and barge operations. You have the Offshore Marine Service Association that services oil rigs out in the Gulf of Mexico. So that's a sampling of who's out there supporting this law.
Good. No, that's good to know. Ewing, you had some questions or comments about barging. What would you like to say?
Yeah, Colin, address how this affects the barging industry.
Yeah, so I would say my impression is that the barge industry is probably, if you were to look at where the big gains to be had, I think it's going to be mostly in coastal shipping, less in our inland waterways. I don't think it's zero, but less because, again, as I said earlier, the keys to efficiency to getting your costs down, you have to have scale, and our barges do have scale. I mean, there's something like 20,000 barges on the Mississippi River alone. I think overall there's more like 30,000 barges out there. So, you have to always replace them. So there's some scale to be had there. That said, I read just a few weeks ago analysis by some company that they claim that U.S. barges were 4 to 5 times more expensive to build than foreigners. Again, that's one person or one organization. I can't verify that. If that's accurate, obviously that has implications for the efficiency of barging. But more generally, something I'll note is that we use barges even along our coast. We use something called articulated tug and barges. These kind of superficially resemble a ship. It's a tug, and there's a notch in the back of the barge, and the bow of the tug kind of locks into that notch. And these are, the advantage to them is they have fewer crew than a ship, so you save on crew costs, and they're cheaper to build, so you save on that. But they're less efficient, and especially over longer distances. So if you look internationally, like 80% of all ATVs are used here in the U.S. in one country, which suggests to me these are suboptimal, and that without the Jones Act, we'd see a lot of barges replaced with self-propelled vessels that would be more efficient. So unfortunately, I can't give you details, but that's kind of my read on it.
That's when you go to the Mediterranean, there's a lot more smaller ship barging operations because they just don't have the channel depth required by a lot of these ships, and a whole lot of commerce takes place, smaller vessels and barges, and I'm sure this whole thing ties in somehow that would make transportation in the U.S. less expensive and more efficient.
Yeah. Yes, I agree.
Thank you.
Nice. Anyone else want to chime in here?
I will. Colin, maybe this is a statement of the obvious, but is there a movement to get rid of the Jones Act, or is there a desire to work on, as has been highlighted here by Pablo, like rethink how we're doing our shipping so that we can be, I don't know, call it competitive, to be able to grow the U.S. shipping?
Yeah, so there are some people in Congress that have recognized this problem and that have worked to, and kind of runs the gamut. So, for example, you have Senator Mike Lee of Utah. He's introduced bills to just repeal the law wholesale. You've seen other folks like Representative Ed Case of Hawaii. He has pushed legislation to exempt Hawaii and the non-contiguous states and territories, so Alaska, Puerto Rico, Guam, as well from the law, giving their huge dependence on shipping. I know that Representative Scott Perry of Pennsylvania, he introduced legislation that was even narrower than that. He said, let's just exempt liquefied natural gas shipments from the Jones Act, because he pointed out that we're the world's biggest LNG exporter. We can't send it to other parts of the United States, and that in 2022, the same month, in February of 2022, the same month that Russia invaded Ukraine, Puerto Rico imported LNG that was Russian. And this is crazy. It doesn't make sense on economic grounds. It certainly doesn't make sense on national security grounds. Can we just at least exempt things where we're not in the business of shipping LNG? So why don't we exempt that? So these are all different approaches that have been proposed. As far as revitalizing U.S. shipbuilding, making it more efficient, better, competitive. You hear talk about it. I mean, there's a lot of people who recognize the problem. They go, we're in a bad state, especially on the Navy side. Navy programs are regularly over budget and delayed by significant amounts of time. But the question is, how do you do that? And the sad truth is that we've recognized this. We've been trying to fix it for decades. U.S. shipbuilding has been internationally uncompetitive since the late 1800s. Now, the magnitude of it, back in, say, when the Jones Act was passed, a U.S. built ship was 20% more expensive than one built abroad. Now we're like, 300 to 400%. But I don't see anything in the offing that presents a serious path forward on how that is achieved. That's kind of how I see things right now.
And Martha, I'll extrapolate on that and say what Colin can't really say, but I mean, this is in union DNA. So it's like one of those things like non-GMO or nukes are bad that we're told since birth, but we don't question why. So if you're in a union and you say the words Jones Act, that's an immediate, wall is up. They can't defend it necessarily, but it's a point of friction right there. So this is one of those, this is why I love this topic, because it's a rational approach to an irrational issue that needs to be heard out there. And both parties, at least Biden and Trump, they dance. This is a third rail for both of them. They're both courting the union vote. So they have to, play nice with the Jones Act as it is.
Yeah, the AFL-CIO, has been explicit in their support for the Jones Act. There are strange political bedfellows here. You can find Democrats and Republicans on both sides of the issue. So, for example, Ted Cruz, he's criticized the Jones Act, and also AOC has criticized the Jones Act. Now, they look at it from very different perspectives. Ted Cruz, he's an energy guy. He says, it's ridiculous. I can't send oil and natural gas to other parts of the U.S. from Texas. And AOC says this is terrible for Puerto Rico. And then, of course, you can also find supporters that are both Republican and Democrat. For example, back in 2019, some of President Trump's advisors said, hey, you should waive the Jones Act for like 10 years so we can send LNG to other parts of the US and stop being dependent on foreigners. And Bloomberg had a news story saying that Trump was leaning in favor of doing this. And then a week later, both senators from Louisiana and Mississippi and Alaska, all Republicans, plus Steve Scalise, another Republican, all went down the White House and said, no, don't touch the Jones Act. And then Trump backed off. But then again, Mike Lee and Ted Cruz, those are very, conservative Republicans, and they're both opposed to it. So it's a really interesting issue that presents opportunities for some really interesting coalition building.
I completely agree. And every time I do talk to politicians or candidates, and they say, well, what's one thing I can stand on? I say the Jones Act. So a lot of seeds are being planted out there. And as Colin knows, I brief him sometimes and I have those conversations. We're trying we can, and hopefully anyone who's here today or anyone listening to this will go and research the Jones Act and do it with open eyes. Don't come in there with preconceived notions and really hear the whole story. And for those deeper questions, obviously reach out to Colin. His LinkedIn profile is in the chat box, and I'll put it below in the video afterwards. And Colin, I really want to thank you. Any closing words that you have out there for us about the Jones Act?
Well, I would just like to thank you, Andrew, for inviting me to speak to you all this morning. Thank you all for your time. I appreciate you taking time out of your day to listen to me drone on about the Jones Act. I would ultimately say that, on the economic side, the Jones Act is a law that interferes with American commerce. Distance is a barrier to trade. In the U.S., we live in a huge country. I think you sometimes forget how big it is. It takes 6 hours to fly from one coast to the other. I mean, it's huge. And if we had efficient shipping, I just think of the possibilities that could be unlocked and all the domestic supply chains, the new efficiencies It was interesting. You mentioned earlier, we talked about the decline of the U.S. steel industry. Well, back in the 80s, there was a government study done that said about the U.S. steel industry and why so many foreign imports were coming into the Western states, and the Western states weren't buying steel from the Eastern states. Well, one of the reasons it mentioned there was the Jones Act. Because again, once you factor in the cost of transportation, it didn't make any sense to buy the American product. You also think about the steel industry, all the taconite, which is an input used to produce steel at these integrated mills like the ones that Bethlehem was running. Well, that all goes by Jones Act shipping on the Great Lakes. What if we can make that more efficient? You want to revitalize not just agriculture, manufacturing, other things. You want to improve it. I think Jones Act is one way of doing that. And then on the national security side, I'm all for meeting our national security needs. I'm an Army brat. My dad is, a career Army guy. And I take that seriously. I just think this is a bad way of going about it. Let's do that. Let's do things that meet our national security needs. This isn't it, is my only point. But yeah, by all means, don't overlook that. Don't forget about that. Is real and deserves to be addressed, but this isn't the way to do it. And again, if you guys want to reach out with further questions or you want to argue with me, I love those conversations the most. People disagree. And maybe the things you think I don't get or don't appreciate, by all means, reach out. I'm happy to put that in the chat. And then also, Andrew has my contact information if you need it.